Hi, my name is Grandma Betty, and welcome to Grandma Betty's Recipes, where we dig up the forgotten food wisdom that kept American families fed, happy, and coming back for seconds, even when times were hard. Somewhere between the 1980s and right now, we made a terrible mistake. We traded cast iron skillets for takeout apps and 100-year-old recipes for $30 meal kits that somehow still leave you hungry.
The meals your grandmother made from almost nothing were smarter, heartier, and more satisfying than anything trending on the internet today. And today we are going to get every single one of them back. 1. Hamburger. Gravy over mashed potatoes. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes was the weeknight savior of families from Ohio to Oregon all the way through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. 1 pound of ground beef, a handful of flour, and some milk was all it took to feed 6 people without anyone leaving the table hungry. You brown the meat in a cast iron skillet, build a roux right there in those beef drippings, and slowly pour in milk until the pan transforms into a thick, peppery, deeply savory gravy that gets ladled over a mountain of buttery mashed potatoes. Simple as that.
This was not sad food. This was the dish that meant Mom had handled it and everything was going to be fine. The gravy soaked down into those potatoes and created something no restaurant has ever quite managed to recreate.
I still make this on cold Tuesday nights, and I will not apologize for it. 2. Salmon patties with creamed peas. Now here is one that half of you remember fondly, and the other half have never heard of, which is honestly a tragedy we need to address right now. Salmon patties with creamed peas were a weeknight staple all through the 1940s and 1950s, built for families who needed real protein on the table without spending real protein money to get it there. 1 can of salmon, breadcrumbs, an egg, a little onion, salt, and pepper. You mix it together, form patties, and fry them in butter until each side is golden brown with a crispy crust that crackles when your fork breaks through it.
But the creamed peas are what made this dish something special. A simple white sauce poured over everything with sweet green peas tucked throughout, warm and creamy and deeply satisfying. A 5-person family ate well off a single can of salmon and a bag of frozen peas.
My mother made this every single Friday, and the whole house knew it by 4 in the afternoon. 3. Tomato soup cake. I can already see some of you making a face at the screen, and I completely understand. But I need you to trust me on this one, because tomato soup cake is one of the greatest victims of food snobbery in the history of American cooking. This recipe appeared in cookbooks and on the back of Campbell's soup cans all the way back to the 1930s, and it fed sweet tooth cravings across the country for decades before someone decided it sounded too strange to bother with. Here is the secret. You cannot taste the tomato soup. What you can taste is a warmly spiced, deeply moist spice cake with hints of cinnamon and cloves and that tender crumb that only comes from old recipes that actually understood how moisture works. The tomato soup replaces the liquid and some of the fat, and it does the job so well that generations of families ate this cake without ever questioning the ingredient list. Topped with cream cheese frosting, this cake looked and tasted special enough to bring to church suppers and birthday celebrations. It was the Depression-era cook's great magic trick, turning a pantry staple into something that felt like a treat. The fact that we stopped making this one is genuinely confusing to me. It costs almost nothing, it tastes wonderful, and it makes people at the table very, very happy. What exactly are we waiting for? 4. Stuffed bell peppers.
Now, stuffed bell peppers have not completely disappeared, I will give them that, but the version most people make today barely resembles what grandmothers were pulling out of their ovens in the 1950s and 1960s, and the differences matter. The vintage version was built around stretching.
Ground beef and cooked rice combined together, seasoned simply, stuffed into pepper halves that had been parboiled just long enough to soften slightly without losing their shape. The filling was bound with tomato sauce, sometimes just a can of condensed tomato soup thinned with a little water, and the whole pan went into the oven with liquid in the bottom to create steam and keep everything tender. Shredded cheese on top during the final 10 minutes was considered a luxury, not a standard, which tells you something about how carefully these meals were constructed around what was available. What made the vintage stuffed pepper special was its completeness. Vegetables, protein, starch, and sauce all in one self-contained package. Every pepper was an individual serving, which made feeding a family of 4 look effortless and almost elegant. There is something deeply satisfying about a meal, where the container is also part of the food itself. We should absolutely be making these more often. And yes, you can use green peppers, which cost about 1/3 of what the pretty red ones cost. Your grandmother knew that too. 5. Potato soup. Potato soup is so simple that people stopped respecting it, and that is perhaps the most backwards thing that has happened in the American kitchen since someone decided a salad needed 17 ingredients. This soup fed families through the Depression, through wartime rationing, through every hard season of the 20th century because potatoes were cheap, filling, and available year-round without fail.
The base is nothing but diced potatoes cooked in water or thin broth with chopped onion, salt, and pepper. Once the potatoes are tender, some get mashed against the side of the pot to thicken the broth naturally, while the rest stay chunky for texture. A pour of milk or cream goes in at the end, along with a knob of butter that melts across the surface in a way that is genuinely beautiful if you allow yourself to appreciate it.
Some families added diced celery or a handful of shredded cheese. Others floated a spoonful of sour cream on top and called it fancy, but the heart of the dish never changed. It was hot, filling, deeply comforting, and cost almost nothing to put on the table. I have made this soup for 60 years, and I have never once been told to make something else instead. That ought to tell you everything you need to know. Sichit X. Bread pudding. Here is a dessert that turned stale bread into something better than the original, which is either genius or witchcraft, and I've never quite decided which. Bread pudding was a Depression-era cook's answer to waste, built on the principle that day-old bread soaked in a sweetened egg custard and baked until golden and slightly puffed was not a lesser version of something. It was its own magnificent thing entirely. You tear or cube the bread, whatever kind is going stale, and soak it in a mixture of eggs, milk, sugar, vanilla, and warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. Raisins go in if you have them. Leftover fruit preserves can be swirled through the mixture for something more special. The whole thing bakes until the custard sets and the top turns deeply golden with a slight crust that gives way to a soft, custardy interior underneath.
A simple vanilla sauce or warm caramel drizzled over the top turned this humble dish into something people genuinely looked forward to. Church suppers served bread pudding because it could be made in enormous quantities from ingredients that cost almost nothing. Families served it on weeknights as dessert when the budget had nothing left for proper sweets.
And somehow, somewhere along the way, we started buying packaged desserts instead and acting like that was an upgrade. It was not. 7. A cream chipped beef on toast. Now I know exactly what some of you are thinking because the American military gave this dish a nickname during World War II that I am absolutely not repeating on this channel. But those soldiers were eating a cafeteria version, made with very little care and a great many shortcuts. The homemade version, families served on toast all through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, was an entirely different experience. Thin slices of dried beef, still available in small jars at most grocery stores, get briefly rinsed and cooked in a creamy white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. The sauce thickens around the beef and takes on its salty, slightly smoky flavor until the whole thing becomes something rich and deeply savory, spooned generously over thick toast. This was breakfast, lunch, and supper, depending on the week. 15 minutes, almost no money, a genuinely satisfying meal. Modern cooking could learn a great deal from that kind of quiet efficiency, and I mean that sincerely. 8. Pinto beans and cornbread. If you grew up in Appalachia, the rural South, or really any corner of America where working people knew how to make do, then pinto beans and cornbread is not a forgotten meal at all. It is a religion. But for a lot of American families who moved away from those traditions during the 1970s and 1980s in pursuit of what they considered more sophisticated eating, this combination drifted off the weekly menu and has not really come back. That is a genuine loss.
Dried pinto beans soaked overnight and simmered for hours with a ham hock or a chunk of salt pork, low and slow until they turn creamy and the broth becomes thick and deeply flavored. Season them with nothing more than salt, pepper, and a little onion, and you have a pot of food so good and so filling that everything else on the table becomes secondary. The cornbread alongside is not optional.
It is structural. You use it to scoop, to soak up the broth, and to fill in any remaining corners of hunger that the beans might have missed. This meal costs almost nothing. A pound of dried pinto beans feeds 6 people and costs less than most single cups of coffee today. There is a quiet dignity in a bowl of well-cooked beans that I think we gave up too easily when convenience took over. Time to bring it back. 9. Chicken and dumplings. There are comfort foods, and then there is chicken and dumplings, which exists in a category by itself that I would simply call necessary. This dish goes back generations in American cooking, and it reached its peak popularity in the kitchens of the 1930s and 1940s, when a whole stewing hen could be stretched into a meal that fed 8 or 9 people with dumplings, doing the heavy lifting of filling bellies. You simmer the chicken low and slow until the meat falls from the bone, and the broth turns rich and golden and slightly glossy from the natural gelatin in the bones. Pull the meat, shred it, return it to the pot. Then comes the part that separates the great from the merely good, the dumplings. A simple dough of flour, baking powder, salt, and milk dropped by spoonfuls directly into the simmering broth, where they puff and rise and become these soft, pillowy clouds that absorb the chicken flavor all the way through. Some families made flat dumplings, rolled thin and cut into strips that cooked into something closer to homemade noodles. Others swore by the drop dumpling method. Both are correct. Neither should have stopped being made. This dish requires almost no expensive ingredients, just time and attention and the willingness to let something simmer. Those are skills worth keeping. 10. Fried mush.
All right, I fully expect some of you to stop right here and say, Grandma Betty, you have finally lost your mind. But hear me out, because fried mush was on the breakfast table of half of rural America all the way through the 1950s, and the people eating it were not suffering. They were starting their mornings with something hot, crispy, filling, and made from ingredients that cost almost nothing.
Cornmeal? Mush is just cornmeal, cooked low and slow in salted water until it becomes thick and porridge-like. You pour it into a loaf pan and let it cool overnight in the refrigerator until it sets firm enough to slice. The next morning you cut thick slabs of that cold mush and fry them in a skillet with butter until each side develops a deep golden crust that crackles when you press it. The inside stays soft and creamy. The outside is crispy and almost sweet from the corn. Served with maple syrup, sorghum molasses, or just a good pour of butter, fried mush was a breakfast that stuck with you through a full morning of hard work without asking anything of your grocery budget. Farmers loved it. Children loved it, though they would not always admit that at school. I made it for my own children, and they cleaned their plates every single time, even the one who claimed not to like cornmeal. You know who you are. 11. Ham hock and bean soup. If fried mush was the breakfast of hard-working rural America, then ham hock and bean soup was its dinner equivalent. A single smoked ham hock, which cost almost nothing at the butcher and still does, simmered for hours in a pot of water with dried navy beans, an onion, some garlic, and a bay leaf or two, produced soup so rich and deeply flavored that it seemed impossible it came from such humble ingredients. The ham hock doesn't provide much actual meat. That is not really the point. What it provides is smoke and salt and collagen and depth, flavoring the broth and the beans so completely that every spoonful carries that distinct warming quality that makes you want to sit down with a piece of bread and not stand up again for a while. As the beans cook, some break down and thicken the soup naturally, while others stay whole for texture.
By the time this soup is finished, usually after 3 or 4 hours on a low burner, the kitchen smells like someone has been cooking since early morning, and the result tastes like it too. Families made enormous pots of this on Sundays and ate from them all week, the flavor improving each day as everything continued to settle together. This is the kind of efficiency that deserves our deepest respect.
12. Egg noodle casserole. Before Hamburger Helper arrived on grocery shelves in 1971 and convinced an entire generation that making a quick skillet meal required a packet, home cooks were already doing this better with egg noodles, ground beef, and a handful of pantry ingredients that cost almost nothing. The egg noodle casserole was a one-dish supper that appeared in every church cookbook from 1940 onward, with small variations from town to town that reflected what each family had on hand. Brown your ground beef with onion until everything is golden and the house smells like supper is happening. Cook your egg noodles separately and drain them. Then combine everything in a casserole dish with cream of mushroom soup, a splash of milk, salt, pepper, and whatever shredded cheese you have available, canned corn or diced green pepper, added color, and stretch the dish further. A breadcrumb topping mixed with a little melted butter went over the whole thing before it went into the oven. 40 minutes later, something golden and bubbling and deeply satisfying came out of that oven, and it cost less than $2 to feed a family of 5. That math has not changed as much as you might think. This casserole deserves a permanent spot on Tuesday night dinner tables everywhere, and I genuinely do not know when we decided that was too simple to bother with. 13. Oxtail stew.
Here's where things get interesting, and I want you to pay close attention because this dish has quietly become fashionable in expensive restaurants, while most home cooks have completely forgotten that their grandmothers were making it for decades as budget food. Oxtail stew was the butcher's humble offering all through the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s. Tail cuts cost almost nothing because nobody considered them desirable, which meant thrifty cooks had access to some of the most flavorful beef on the animal for pennies.
Oxtails get browned deeply on all sides in a heavy pot, and then slow braised for 3 to 4 hours in beef broth with onions, carrots, celery, garlic, canned tomatoes, and whatever herbs you have growing in the garden. During that long, patient cooking process, the collagen in the joints breaks down into the richest, most glossy sauce you have ever seen, and the meat becomes so tender it slips from the bone at the lightest pressure. This is not quick food, it never was, but it is deeply rewarding food that costs far less than it tastes like it should. When those fancy downtown restaurants charge $35 for oxtail stew, they are selling your grandmother's Tuesday night supper back to you at a markup. Make it yourself. It is time. 14. Liver and onions. I understand. I know. Before you skip ahead, I'm asking you to give me just 60 more seconds on this one. Beef liver was among the cheapest cuts available through most of the 20th century, which means anyone willing to cook it properly had access to one of the most nutritious and economical proteins in the entire butcher case. The key to liver and onions, and I cannot stress this enough, is not overcooking it. This is exactly where most people's bad childhood memories were created. Liver cooked past medium is tough, grainy, and bitter, and whoever served you that version owes you a sincere apology. Sliced thin, dredged lightly in seasoned flour, and cooked in butter for just 2 to 3 minutes per side, it is tender, mild, and genuinely delicious. The caramelized onions aren't decoration, they balance everything beautifully. Served over mashed potatoes, this meal delivered real iron, real protein, and real satisfaction for almost nothing. Your body still wants it, even if your memory disagrees. 15. Vegetable beef soup. There's a version of vegetable beef soup that comes from a can and tastes like it came from a can. And then there is the version that grandmothers made by simmering a cheap beef shank or soup bone in water for hours before adding every vegetable in the garden or the cellar. And these two things share a name and almost nothing else. The homemade version was a weekly staple in working-class American homes all the way through the 1970s, built on the wisdom that a soup pot could turn very little into a great deal.
Start with your beef and let it simmer low until the broth is rich and golden. Remove the meat, strip it from the bone, and return it to the pot. Then comes the vegetable parade. Carrots, celery, potatoes, onions, canned tomatoes, green beans, corn, whatever is cheapest, whatever is in season, whatever needs using up before it turns.
A handful of barley or cabbage went in when the goal was stretching the soup even further. This soup improved with every day it sat in the refrigerator. The flavors settled and deepened. And by day 3, it tasted like something that had taken a week of effort. Families ate it with cornbread or crackers or just a plain slice of white bread, and nobody walked away from that table hungry. Not once. 16. Poor man's steak. The name says everything and nothing at the same time. Poor man's steak was not steak. It was ground beef mixed with crackers and seasoning, pressed into a loaf or individual patties, chilled overnight so it held its shape, then sliced thick and pan-fried before being finished in a simple brown gravy made right in the drippings. But the thing is, when you did it right, it felt like steak night. That was the entire point. This dish appeared in budget cookbooks and newspaper food columns all through the 1930s and 1940s, offering families a way to turn ground beef into something that looks substantial and ceremonial on the plate. Pressing and chilling the meat gave the patties a firm, sliceable texture that a plain hamburger patty never has. The gravy made from flour and drippings and beef broth turned the whole thing luxurious in a way that the ingredient list had absolutely no right to support. Served on a platter with mashed potatoes and canned green beans, poor man's steak was Sunday dinner, when Sunday dinner had to be economical, done without looking it. Guests were served this. Company ate this. Nobody felt shortchanged. That is the kind of cooking genius we walked away from when we decided simple was not enough. 17. Crackling cornbread. Most modern cornbread is a perfectly decent thing, and I say that without much enthusiasm because most modern cornbread has completely forgotten its own history. Crackling cornbread made with crispy bits of rendered pork fat left over from making lard produce something so much more flavorful and interesting than anything from a yellow box mix that the comparison is almost unfair. You stir the cracklings, those small, crispy, salty, deeply porky bits, directly into a simple buttermilk cornmeal batter. Then the whole thing gets poured into a smoking hot cast iron skillet greased with lard, which creates that incomparable bottom crust that regular cornbread pans simply never produce. It emerges golden and fragrant with a bottom that actually snaps when you break it.
Rural families in the South and Appalachia made this every single week through the 1940s and 50s because every component came from the family hog. Nothing was wasted. Everything had purpose. That kind of cooking had a soul that box mixes cannot touch.
18. See cold plate supper. This one needs a little explanation for anyone who grew up after the 1960s, because the cold plate supper was a specific institution in American home cooking that quietly vanished. Without anyone noticing, it was gone. On hot summer evenings or nights when nobody wanted to stand over a stove, families sat down to cold plates. Arranged, thoughtful, composed cold plates that were considered a proper supper and not a failure of effort. Whatever cooked meats were on hand, sliced thin alongside hard-boiled eggs, garden tomatoes still warm from the sun, cottage cheese, cold potato salad, pickled vegetables, and white bread. Assembled with care, eaten together as a family, no cooking required, no apology offered. What the cold plate supper understood is that good food does not always require heat. It requires thought and intention. On a 100-degree August evening in 1952, nobody needed a hot meal. They needed a cold plate supper and some good company. 19. Beef, skillet potatoes, and sausage. Here is one that working families all across America ate at least once a week through the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, requiring nothing more than an iron skillet, some sliced potatoes, a length of smoked sausage, and the willingness to let things get properly browned before moving them around. That last part is critical. I cannot tell you how many people ruin skillet potatoes by stirring constantly when the entire point is to simply let them sit. Slice your potatoes thin, get them into a hot skillet with oil or lard, season generously, and leave them alone until the bottom turns golden and crispy. Add your sliced smoked sausage halfway through, letting it blister and render its fat into everything in the pan. 25 minutes, one skillet. A family of 4 fed completely. Children ate without complaint. Adults went back for seconds. The skillet got wiped out with bread. I have made this meal at least 500 times, and it has never once let me down. Tang 20. Leftover pinsai. And here we are at the last one, and I want you to understand that I saved this one for last because in some ways it represents the entire philosophy behind everything else on this list. Leftover pie was not a recipe exactly, it was a practice, a way of thinking about food that said, nothing gets wasted, everything has a second life, and a good pastry crust can make any combination of yesterday's food feel like today's intention. You make a basic pie crust, or you use whatever you have, and you fill it with whatever leftovers are in the refrigerator. Roast beef and gravy with diced potatoes and carrots. Leftover stewed chicken with vegetables and a splash of cream. Pork and beans with a little onion and mustard. The crust goes on top, the edges get crimped, a few slashes cut into the top, and 35 minutes in a moderate oven later, what was yesterday's odds and ends becomes tonight's dinner, with genuine dignity and honest flavor. This practice was standard kitchen behavior all through the Depression, the war years, and well into the 1960s, in households where wasting food was simply not something you did. The crust forgave almost anything. The oven transformed almost everything. Almost. And the family sitting down to a golden, bubbling pie felt taken care of in the most complete sense of that phrase, never knowing or caring that what was underneath had started life as Thursday's leftovers. Well, there you have it. 20 meals that carried American families through some of the hardest years of the 20th century, built with patience, creativity, and an absolute refusal to let a tight budget become an excuse for a bad dinner. Every single one of these dishes is still worth making, not because we have to, but because they are genuinely, honestly, deeply good, and because the wisdom baked into them is worth keeping alive. I am Grandma Betty, and I believe with my whole heart that the best cooking America ever produced happened not in fancy restaurants or on television competition shows, but in small kitchens where someone who loved their family stood over a cast iron skillet and figured it out. Try one of these recipes this week, and if you made it all the way to the end of this video, well, you are my kind of people. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma Betty's recipes so you don't miss what we uncover next. Because, honey, we have only just scratched the surface. Now go cook something. The stove is waiting.